Okay, let's do a formal welcome. Let's do a formal welcome. Let's get the, here we go. All right, folks, welcome back. This is lesson 2 of Judaism at Home. I'm excited to be here with you this evening. We have a lot to talk about. We have, if you thought last week was packed with information and insight, just you wait and see. Tonight is off the hook. Whatever the kids call it, off the chain, off the hook. I'm not sure what they're saying nowadays. But anyway, it's the real deal. It's legit. There's a thing that's been happening during the pandemic, during the shelter at home. By the way, I'm muting everybody. This is not a sign that I don't want to hear you. It's a sign that I just want to keep the background quiet in case things move around. But at any point, unmute yourself, jump in, ask, add, clarify, correct, whatever. At any point, it's an open form. Okay, there's one thing that's been happening a lot during this the shelter in place, shelter at home, pandemic situation, and that is there's been a lot of eating. This is what I hear. This is what they tell me. You know, there's a meme of somebody trying to like close their pants, and it says this is another meaning of social distancing. There's another meme of, that was a joke. There's another meme that talks about pandas and how pandas eat 12 to 13 hours a day. And it says, indeed, now that we're at home, it's the same thing, which is why they call this a pandemic, sort of. Okay, by the way, memes work really well visually. When I share them, you know, they get a little wonky, but this is my attempt. You know, people now are getting tans from the light of their refrigerator. I mean, that's kind of what's going on during this moment. Let's see what else I have here meme-wise. Okay, it's like the punctuation one that says, I'm giving up eating chocolate for a month. And then it's like, oh, sorry, wrong punctuation. I'm giving up eating chocolate for a month. Okay, so, and the memes are endless, which is where we are in 2020, the years of the meme, the generation meme. So here's what I want to say. Here's what I want to say as we kind of get rolling in this session. Food is a very important topic. It's important because we're doing it all the time. You know, pandemic, no pandemic, it's always on our mind. We wake up, what are we eating for breakfast? Yeah, it's like, we're working, okay, what about lunch? Dinner, what are we making? Yeah, it's always like we're anticipating, we're shopping, we're prepping, we're cooking, we're eating, we're talking, we're Instagramming what we ate, where we ate, leaving reviews on Yelp. It's like so much of life revolves around the gastronomical, right, the eating experience. So tonight we're going to explore, you know, this is Judaism at Home, which is all about, you know, this course is all about Jewish values, Jewish ideas, Jewish principles, Jewish rituals, Jewish life at home. What better topic than to talk about food? Plus, if you remember last week, we got us through the wake up until the morning coffee, folks. Take a sip of that coffee, jump into that cheesecake or Danish or breakfast cereal or whatever you're going to eat, because tonight we talk about the food. Tonight we talk about what it means to eat in a healthy fashion, to eat in a not only physically healthy fashion, but a spiritually healthy fashion. Okay, so again, there's a lot to talk about. Give me 1 second here. Okay. Just grabbing some resources. Okay, now, here we go. We are going to start from the beginning. When we talk about food, from the beginning. So the first thing I need to say is that eating is not a simple thing. Eating is not as simple as it looks from a Jewish perspective. Tonight, we're not going to focus so much on what we eat. That's another course. What's kosher, what's not. Tonight is not about what we eat. It's about how we eat. Eating is an art form. Jewishly, eating is an art form. It's a spiritual art form. And tonight, we're going to learn the powerful Jewish take, the art form of eating food. So I want to address why it is, first things first, why does Judaism, Jewish law, speak about Jewish philosophy, speak about food in the first place? Food seems like a topic that should be up for, it should not be it seems like it shouldn't be a Jewish topic. Hey, Sam, welcome. So, you would think that, that food wouldn't be a Jewish topic. What do I mean by that? Look, Judaism should speak about Torah, should speak about religious experiences, prayer, Shabbat, those things like, spiritual stuff, spiritual activities. But food seems to be completely the realm of the physical, the body. Why is Judaism talking about food and how we eat? So let me share with you a perspective. Here's the perspective. Here's the idea. 3 points. Number one, as I mentioned last week, there's a value in living a disciplined life. I mentioned the marshmallow experiment, where the researchers at, I think it was Stanford, I think that's what we had recalled, or maybe I'm wrong, but researchers at a leading university back in the day, decades ago, did a study which children could be disciplined and not eat the marshmallow for a certain amount of time and be rewarded with a second marshmallow. The more disciplined we are, studies have shown, the healthier we are all around, the more successful, happier, healthier, if you could say this term, better off we are living a more disciplined life in all areas. So it's been noted in some Jewish sources that the Jewish rituals and laws surrounding the food and eating experience are designed for exactly that reason, i.e., namely, to create discipline within the eating experience. Judaism tells us what to eat, what not to eat, when to eat, when not to eat, how to eat, how not to eat, what to eat with what not, with what, and what not to eat with the other thing. So it's creating discipline. Now, even if we just limit it to that, without looking any deeper, there would be value. Dayenu, there would be value. Just the fact that we have some measure of discipline, that itself is a gift, let alone the specific areas that we're going to speak of in today's session, and we could have many sessions on this. Okay, so that's number one, discipline. It creates a healthy life in all respects, discipline in our meals as well. Number two, second point, why Judaism mentions or discusses what we eat. The second point is God wants a relationship. God wants a relationship with our entire beings. God wants not just a relationship with our souls, God wants a relationship with our bodies as well. And how better to have a relationship with us than God is also involved in our eating experience. In other words, God is not just wanting to connect with us when we go to synagogue, right? When we go to synagogue, that's when we encounter God. No, God wants us to encounter him even when we sit down at our dinner tables. Even when we're doing something that doesn't seem so divine or godly, God says, I want that to be holy as well. I want that to be infused and instilled with my values. So eating is transformed into a higher, loftier experience. It's not just about satisfying the body, it's also about filling the soul. And it's also about arriving at a certain connection with God, even in that experience. The final point I'll mention, the third point about why Judaism talks about food and has something to say about what we eat and how we eat, is the fact that our job on earth is to elevate the world around us, right? It's to elevate the world around us. And how do we elevate the world? It's by engaging in physical activities for a higher purpose. Kabbalistically, the mystics tell us that how do we elevate the potential of existence? It's by, not by disengaging, by engaging and uplifting, by getting in and extracting the sparks of holiness, extracting the purpose of this action, which means that eating can be a very holy experience. We're not just eating for our bodies, to fill our bodies, we're eating to fill our souls. This is a theme that's going to become very apparent as we go through tonight's lesson. But I just want to summarize the first idea that I want to share is, if we take a step back and say, well, this seems strange that Judaism should have anything to say about food and eating. You're right, it might seem strange, but for three reasons, Judaism does deal with food. Number one, discipline. This leading a disciplined life begins with our meals. Number two, God wants a relationship with our entire being, including our mouths and stomachs. In other words, our gastronomical experiences. And number three, the purpose of life is to sanctify the world. And so we sanctify our eating as well. Okay, so let's jump right in. We're in the morning. We woke up. We said Moda'ani. We got dressed. We washed our face, showered, dressed, all that good stuff. We washed Netilat Yadayim. We washed our hands. We recited the blessing over the hand washing. We recited the blessing for our bodies working healthfully in a healthy fashion. We thank God for the different functions that we have, the ability to think, the ability to see, the ability to stand up, the ability to stretch, sit up, stretch, etc. Okay, so we thank God. We bless God for the Torah and studied a little bit of Torah, and now we are ready to drink some coffee. Now, in certain communities, the custom is not to eat anything before the full morning service, known as shacharit, which is a longer service than what we spoke about last week. This is the morning prayers. It could take anywhere between, if you're fast, it could take 20 minutes, and it could range from 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 50 minutes, depending on how slow you go into prayers and how much of them you say. You can do a shorter version that's only 5 minutes, and that's fine. But the point is that some have a custom that until saying all of those blessings, they won't taste anything. No food, not even a drink, not even coffee. But I want to share with you the Chabad custom. The Chabad custom is that you do eat or drink something before prayer. Why? So I want to share with you a story. The story goes back to the year 1851. And there was a young woman whose name was Rivka. But it wasn't just Rivka, it was Rebbitzin Rivka. It was like, Rabbi, and the title for the spouse of Rabbi is Rebbitzin. She was known as Rebbitzin Rivka. She was married to a great rabbi and the daughter-in-law of the then leader of Chabad, who was known as, by a book that he wrote called Tzemach Tzedek, known as the Tzemach Tzedek. His name was Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Lubavitch. He lived in the 1800s in Lubavitch, which is a city in Belarus in White Russia, where Chabad had its roots for many years. Okay, back to the story. So she got ill. She took ill. This young woman, Rebbitzin Rivka, and her doctor told her that in order to get better, she needs to begin eating first thing in the morning. So what did she do? She began waking up earlier than usual, praying earlier than usual, and then eating as soon as possible after prayers. When her father-in-law, who was not only a great mystic, great scholar, but also a great halachic expert, a great expert in Jewish law, when he found out about what his daughter-in-law was doing, he spoke with her and he said to her, I see what you're doing. I see you're trying to eat as soon as possible, but you're still praying before eating. The doctor said you have to eat first thing. He said like this: it's better to eat in order to pray than to pray in order to eat. I'll say it one more time. It's better to eat in order to then pray than to pray in order to eat. And this has become kind of a Chabad motto, which means if you don't eat in the morning, you're very hungry, right? If you need that coffee or that Danish or whatever it is, or that breakfast cereal or whatever it is, the power bar, and your mind is not working, but you tell yourself, well, I got to pray first and then eat. The problem is, then your whole prayer is going to be filled with, let me get this over so I can eat. So you're praying in order to get to the food, which means that your prayer is going to be a little bit looked over, or overlooked. Whereas if you first have your meal, not a full meal, but if you first enjoy some food, a little bit of food, and then you pray, then your eating was in order to pray, and then it's a positive experience. In general, by the way, this is a perspective in life, right? What is primary and what's secondary? Don't make the primary secondary. Don't make the secondary primary. Don't pray in order to eat. That's making the primary secondary. Rather, eat in order to pray. That's the main focus. We get energized in order to do our spiritual pursuits. We don't try to get rid of or discharge our higher obligations in order to engage in something purely physical. Okay, so that again is kind of where we're at with this idea that in the Chabad circles, what we're doing is we're eating a little bit before prayer, which is why we're talking about prayer in the context of the morning. So remember, what we spoke about last week wasn't formal prayer, it was the morning blessings, which is different than prayer. So the prayer service is something else. The morning blessings we do before the food. But now that that's done, last week is in the books, now we're gonna talk about eating and or drinking something. Okay, but first, before you drink that coffee, there's still one more thing. This is interesting. This is probably going to take you by surprise. Maybe not, but maybe it might. Before you eat, if you have animals of any kind, you must feed them first. I'm going to say that one more time. If you own any animals, a cat, any animals on Zoom tonight? Who has animals? No animals, no cats, no dogs. You have anyone around? Okay. No, I'm saying usually sometimes there's a cameo appearance. Okay. So here's the deal. If you have an animal, a cat, a dog, a bird, a fish, a tortoise, we could go on, a hamster, whatever it is, if you have an animal, Jewish law tells us that we have to take care of the animals first. It's unbelievable. You would think, whatever, first the humans and then the animals. Nope. Jewish law tells us feed your animal first, take care of your animal. So, here's the deal. Why is this so? Okay, why is this so? The reason is, I want to give you three reasons. Number one, animals are dependent on us, right? I'm not talking about independent animals, obviously. If there's a wild animal that has to get its own food, then don't worry, you don't have to run into the forest or the jungle to feed all the animals before you eat. It's fine. They're taking care of themselves. But an animal that is domesticated, an animal that's on your property, that's relying on you for food, you have to have compassion. It's dependent on you. You have to have that care. They're entrusted in your care. You have to be a good custodian of the life that you're taking care of. So you have to feed the other before self. That's the way it is. It's the opposite of the old the oxygen mask in the airplane where you put on yours before the others. This time, you feed the animals first. So number one, it's a lesson in compassion. Number two, and this again is very surprising. It says in the good books that sometimes God blesses us in the merit of our animals. I'll say that again. Sometimes God gives us, human beings, blessings only because our animals deserve it, not because of us. Sometimes we're lacking, but they're innocent. So God gives us what we need in order that we should have the resources to take care of the animals. There's a verse, I believe it's in Psalms, that says about speaking to God, you save man and beast. And our sages interpret that in one midrashic source to mean that why do you save man? In other words, why do you protect man, human beings? Because of the beast, because of the animals that we might possess. So maybe our blessing, our livelihood is coming in the merit of taking care of them. So then let's take care of them first before tending to our own needs. Again, a very interesting interpretation, but brought down in the sources. And So the first theme is compassion. Just be a mensch. Second theme is they could be the source of the blessing. Where's the gratitude, right? Where's the, you got to show the gratitude. Okay, let's look at the next point. One final point is eating, as will be the recurring theme in tonight's class. Eating is really about, it's not just feeding ourselves, it's about elevating the world around us. It's about, as I mentioned before, it's like pulling out the purpose or the deeper sparks, the sparks of holiness within the things around us. It's about elevating the world to a higher space. So that elevation happens from the bottom up, right? You got to start from the bottom up. So if we have animals in the house, so they start elevating, right? They're consuming food. We feed them so that they can consume and they elevate. And then we continue the journey, and human beings continue that elevation process. Kabbalah and Jewish philosophy speak of 4 kingdoms, 4 levels of life. Inanimate life, like stones, rocks, whatever, like life that doesn't move. Then there's plant life, vegetation, animals, and human beings. And so the idea is everything goes in order from the bottom up, elevated up. So maybe water your plants also. I don't know, it doesn't say that in the books. I haven't seen that. Go around the house, make sure you water the plants and then feed the animals and then eat. Although according to this third point, maybe that would be true, but I haven't seen it again in Jewish law. But feeding the animals is, and a spiritual reason is, first, the animals do their elevation. They're taking in the energy and it converts to a higher state. If they're eating like vegetation, it converts to a higher state. And then we convert also the other elements into a higher state of energy. And hopefully we use the energy for a good purpose, to do a mitzvah, study Torah, etc. Okay, so those are 3 reasons why we feed animals. First, compassion. The animals bring blessings with them, and elevation happens from the bottom up. Okay, so far so good. Let me check in with you guys. Make sense so far? Yes? Thumbs up? Okay, fantastic. Now, let's continue the conversation. So now that we know about when we're eating, and now that we know about feeding the animals, let's talk about how we get ready to eat. Here's the important thing. If you're having a meal with bread, so this is what you need to do. Judaism tells us we need to wash our hands. I know hand washing is very popular now with COVID-19, but that's for a different reason. This hand washing, we'll see soon, is for entirely different reasons, and it's very important. It's also entirely different than the morning hand washing ritual that we spoke about last week. Last week we spoke about the hand washing that we do in the morning. That's for completely different purposes. Waking up in the morning, it's about the level of impurity and washing that off. That's a different thing. This is before eating bread, specifically bread, we wash our hands. So before I get into the why, here's the how. Here's how we do it. Number 1, make sure your bread is ready. Make sure the food is ready. Why do I say that? Because you don't want to wash your hands, say the blessing, and then start getting the food ready, because then you're going to create a gap between the blessing and the eating. And it's supposed to be in close proximity. So make sure the bread is ready, have it out, cut, whatever, ready to go. Then you head to a sink. We're going to wash your hands, not a bathroom, because this is a mitzvah also. You head to a sink, you use a washing cup like we discussed last week, and wouldn't you know it, lo and behold, guess what I have? Once again, I have props. You knew it was going to happen at some point. I got the same prop as last week, I know. Don't worry, it hasn't been sitting here for a week. This is, once again, a washing basin that I didn't mention this last week. I meant to mention it, and Alex, who's on the line with us here, Alex asked me via email after the class saying, what about the other hand washing? And he was right. And let me mention it right now. Many have the custom. This goes back to last week, not right now. I know I'm interrupting myself. Don't worry, I'm allowed. Here's the deal. Many have the custom that they put something like this by their beds before they go to sleep. That way, when you wake up in the morning, right after the Modani, you do an initial hand washing before you even step foot out of bed. And then you do a second hand washing at the sink after you get dressed with the blessing. And then over bread would be a third hand washing. Are you with me on the OCD thing going on here? Okay, this is what's going on. There's multiple hand washings. So last week we spoke about one in the morning. I'm adding now the preliminary hand washing. If there's indeed spiritual impurity on the fingernails, like we spoke about last week when we wake up, who wants to walk around and spread that around the house? So we keep a little bucket, we keep a cup, a washing cup. Here's the washing cup with my dual handles. Right. Oh, it's dripping on me. That's fine. Okay. Surprise. Now, here's the deal. We do that without a blessing. That's just hand washing to like get rid of that. Later on, after we get dressed, we do the hand washing with the blessing. But now let's get back to our class today. Back to the future. Back to our current conversation. This is all about the washing of the hands for bread. So here we go. I have my wash base. I have my bucket. This is the bucket that goes by the bed. But here's a bucket for convenience purposes. Let me do what I did last week, which is configure my desk area over here in a way that will support you viewing my hand washing technique. That is the goal, right? This is live action, right? This is live TV. Anything could happen, including a live hand washing demo. So take a look-see at my, look at that. Can you see that? Yes. My cup runneth fulleth or something. Okay, here's the deal. Check this out. We use a big cup and we fill it up with water until it's overflowing. You know why? Listen to this. It says in the good books that if you use a lot of water to wash your hands for bread, it's a good merit for gelt. You know what gelt is? Gelt is cash. In other words, blessing for prosperity, use a lot of water. That's what it says. I don't necessarily have a reason why right now, but that's what it says. Now, here we go. We have our cup with water. This is pretty full, not overflowing, just for the sake of my computer and other electronics. Okay, here we go. You take the cup. Now, if you recall last week, let me get back up here. If you recall last week, we alternated hands. Impurity bounces around. We want to hit each hand in turn. But I think I mentioned last week, in response to a question, when it comes to washing the hands for bread, we go one at a time. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. That's the Chabad custom. Some do 2 on each hand. Chabad does 3. Multiples of 3 are always good. And 18, but no need to wash your hands 18 times. That's ridiculous. But 3 times. Take a look. Here we go. You pick it up, right hand, switch to the left hand. Let me make sure you guys can see the whole. Okay. So this is my right hand. Pour it again over the full hand. 1, 2, 3. Switch handles. Two-handled cup. Switch the other hand. And now I pour it over the left hand. 1, 2, 3. I would be doing this into a sink, my kitchen sink. Then you raise the hands. My hands are wet now. I didn't bring a towel this week. Unprepared, as it were. You raise your hand chest level. You're standing up. I'm sitting down right now, but you would be standing up by the sink. You raise your hand chest level, and you recite the blessing. Now, the blessing is in your... Let me just double check this. The blessing should be, oh, by the way, the whole time you should have been, or you could be following along. Let's see if there is the blessing here in the handouts that I sent you. Sketchy. It's on page number 3. Blessing al natilas yadayim. Okay, that's the ending of the blessing. You say, Baruch atah Hashem, Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kedeshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu. Blessed are you, the Lord, King our God, King of the universe, Lord our God, King of the universe, who gave us the commandments and commanded us to wash the hands. So that is the blessing that you recite. After you recite the blessing with your hands held chest high, you then proceed to gently rub the hands together. So you rub the palm of each hand over the back of the other hand. So you do a little bit of like this, and then you dry them. You just do a little bit of a rub with the water that's left in the hands from the hand washing after saying the blessing, and then you dry your hands. Then the next point is, the next thing you're going to do is you go straight over back to the table, assuming that the bread is at the table, right? You go over to the table and you recite the blessing over the bread, which we'll talk about in a moment, the blessings that are said before eating specific foods. So there's two blessings here. There's a blessing after washing the hands, and then a blessing before eating the bread. We say the hamotzi lechem min haaretz, which is the blessing of the bread. Then we take the bread, we dip the bread in salt. I'm going to explain the salt a little bit later. Why do we dip the bread in salt? We dip it 3 times in salt, actually. And then finally, you can eat and enjoy the bread. Okay, that is Jewish law and Jewish ritual regarding eating bread. We wash the hands, we say the blessing, we dry the hands, we take the bread, we dip it in salt, we say the hamotzi, we eat it. Okay, that's how that works. Now, the question is, and I need to mention one more thing, very important. And that is, and you may have noticed this, if you've been around, either you know it because you know it, or you know it because you've seen it, or maybe you haven't seen it before, but I just want to clarify, Jewish custom is that we don't speak. We don't say anything from the time that we wash our hands until we taste that first piece of bread. We don't talk. Why not? Because talking constitutes an interruption, right? If you're focused on a task and you have a conversation, it's pulling you out of that task. And we don't want to divert our attention away from the mitzvah. Whenever you're doing a mitzvah, we're supposed to be mindful, meditative, focused on the mitzvah at hand and not distracted by conversation. The thought is that if you are going to speak and converse, you might end up talking about, you heard what happened with Yankel, the stock market, MLB is resuming. You're going to get into all that other conversation and you're going to forget about the task at hand, which is washing the hands and eating the bread. So you got to stay focused because this is a mitzvah. It's not just eating, it's a holy experience. Now, let's get back to the central question that I wanted to ask, which is not central question, but the question at hand now, which is, why do we wash our hands in the first place? What is the message? What is the meaning? What is the importance of washing? Where did that come from? What's with the washing of the hands? I'm going to tell you 2 rationales. One is pragmatic, that will shock you. And the second is mystical, that will inspire you, hopefully. Let's talk about the pragmatic that will shock you. Okay, in ancient temple times, I'm talking about 2,000 years ago plus, right? The second temple was destroyed 2,000 years ago, and that lasted 410 years, 420 years. The first temple lasted for 430 years. So I'm talking about between 2,000 and 3,000 years ago, when the Jewish temple stood. There were certain laws that applied to the Kohanim. The Kohanim are the priests. There was a Jewish priestly class, if you will, known as Kohanim. A Kohen, someone with the last name Cohen, right, is usually someone from that family. The Kohanim did not have a day job. Their job was to serve in the temple. The Torah is very clear. If you're a Kohen or a Levite for that matter, I know for sure Mark, I don't know if you own land or property, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to have to take that deed away from you after tonight's class. I'm kidding. This is ancient times, temple, etc. So Kohanim, priests, Levites could not own property. They were forbidden to own property. Why? Their job was to serve. How are they supported? Supported by the community. So there were certain gifts that the Israelites would give to the Kohen, the priest, and to the Levites. What were given to the priests? Certain types of food, including breads. Well, here's the thing. These certain breads, the Kohen had to eat only if his hands were ritually pure. And how do they become ritually pure? You guessed it, the old hand washing. It was the Kohanim, the priests, who had to wash their hands before eating the ritual food, because the ritual food had a measure of holiness and their hands had to be holy by washing, with the hand washing. Get this. Jewish law says that because the priests, to ensure that the priests don't forget to wash their hands before eating this special food, the priest should wash their hands, this special bread. The priest should wash their hands before eating any type of bread, even if it's not the holy bread of the gift to the Kohen. Are you with me on this? Okay, the step one is truma bread, special holy bread. That's a gift to the Kohen. The Kohen had to have their hands clean, hand washing. In order that the Kohen should remember, Jewish law says the Kohen should always wash their hands for bread. And in order for the Kohanim as a people to remember, the sages said that every Jew should wash their hands, not only the priests, before bread. You see what this is? It's called the buddy system. This is straight up a buddy system. This is, we're all going to do it so that you do it, so that you remember to do it. It's a ritual that everyone does to support our brothers, the priests. Are you with me on this? How cool this is? This is shocking. Everyone has an obligation, a rabbinic obligation, to wash their hands for bread. Why? In order to help the priests, which tells us a powerful lesson. It's a big deal to help someone else out. And it's a big deal to be sensitive to someone else. And to maybe on some level minimize difference. If you're going to wash your hands, you know what? You're not the outcast. We're also washing our hands. So that's one lesson from this. The second lesson, this is not the second rationale. Don't worry. I don't want to mix. I want to make sure you have the outline clear in your head. I want to give you two reasons why we wash hands, but I want to tell you a second impactful point about this first reason. And that is, for the last 2,000 years, we've still washed our hands. Everybody has washed their hands. Why? So that the priests will remember to wash their hands when eating this truma. But there's no temple, there's no truma, there's no gift. Right? So why are we doing it today? Because at any moment, we are anticipating the coming of Mashiach and the rebuilding of the third temple, and the truma gifts are going to come back. At any moment, we can have a better world, a perfected world, the world of Mashiach. And that is why we're washing our hands. Can you imagine? For 2,000 years, we do this ritual solely because we anticipate the coming of Mashiach. If you've ever been to a meal, if you've ever been to a Seder, and you've washed your hands, maybe multiple times at a Seder, you know why you do it? Because you're anticipating the coming of the Messiah, coming of Mashiach. I bet you didn't know that. It's kind of cool. Jewish practice, not only do we pray about it 3 times a day in the prayers, we ask for a better world, a world that's healed, a world that's kind and gentle to each other, a world in which, right is right and wrong is wrong. And not only that, but we do something about it. We wash our hands in anticipation of the third temple. So I think those are two interesting ramifications, or two interesting messages from this first reason of why we wash hands. A second reason why we wash our hands before bread gets back to the whole spiritual meaning of eating. I mentioned this already a few times. Eating is not a simple task. Eating is referred to by our sages as a battle, as a cage match. Okay, that's maybe the way I refer to it, but it's a battle. It's a fierce battle. It's a war. It's a milchama. It's a war. What's the war about? What's the battle over? How are we going to eat? Are we going to eat correctly with our higher selves or incorrectly with our lower selves? That's the battle over our dinner plates. That's the internal battle that we engage in when we eat. Is this meal or is this item that I eat now going to be strictly about filling our physical hunger, eating in an animalistic, in a very materialistic, in a very instinctive, hedonistic way? Or is eating going to be a higher spiritual experience? It's so easy for eating to devolve into a completely animalistic and hedonistic experience. It's so easy to fall into that trap where, oh, it looks good, let me just eat, without regard for anything else. I don't know what that is. Hold on. I do know what that is. Landline phone. Who calls landlines anymore? Okay, so here's the deal. It's very easy to eat from a strictly materialistic place. It's very easy. It's harder to eat from a mindful place, from a place of sensitivity, from a place of spirituality. Judaism encourages us to eat higher. Judaism encourages us to practice mindful eating, to think about what we're eating and why we're eating what we're eating. So, let me explain. Let me give you a very simple way to understand this. Any eating is difficult. Forget the spiritual piece of it. Eating is an activity that is fraught with difficulty. I mean, think about how hard it is to eat healthy. And when I say healthy right now, I mean physically healthy. It's so hard to eat physically healthy. It's so easy just to mindlessly consume. It's much harder to maintain our heads and our perspective and eat in a way that's healthy physically, let alone spiritually, right? If it's hard to do that even within the physical realm, how much more difficult is it to eat from a higher space, from a more spiritual place? It's very difficult. And we'll talk soon about what that means. You see, eating, we'll talk right now about what that means. Eating is not just filling our stomachs. We have a craving or we have a need to eat biologically, so we eat. Just like our bodies are hungry, our souls are also hungry. Why? Because our souls wish to interact with the energy of the food, ingest and digest that energy, convert it into human energy, right? That food now becomes our flesh and blood. It becomes part of our biology so that we can then do something positive with it. And by doing so, we've elevated the soul of the food. I mentioned this a few times before, but I want to make sure that everyone understands this concept. This is mainly discussed in the Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism. Eating is not so much, well, for the soul at least, it's not a physical experience, it's a spiritual experience. You're taking the soul, the energy, the life of the food. You are absorbing it into your body, and now that it's part of you, so now the animal is part of, or whatever, whether you're eating animal or meat or something else, sushi, plant, vegetable, that life force is now part of you, like literally part of you. You have that energy inside of you. And now when you do the next positive thing, the next mitzvah, study Torah, prayer, whatever it is, something positive, give tzedakah, whatever, you are now elevating that life that gave you life, and you've allowed it to do the mitzvah as well. See, otherwise, how would a plant do a mitzvah? It would be hard, right? It would be hard for a carrot to pray to God. I mean, who am I to say that? But I think I'm on pretty solid ground to say I've never seen a carrot in a minyan. I haven't. It's not a thing. But you know what? If you eat chicken soup, right, with carrots, or if you eat carrot soup, or if you eat sushi with carrot pieces inside of it, yeah, and then you pray, guess what? The carrot came along with you. Reminds me of a story. This is a very Hasidic story. So, and you'll see what I mean by that, by the punchline. So the Hasidic story, there was once a Farbrengen. Everyone knows what a Farbrengen is? I'll tell you what a Farbrengen is. A Farbrengen is a Hasidic gathering. You gotta love, Farbrengen is, people together, like not speaking about, the silly stuff. It's about really, real deep introspective talk and spiritual discussion and encouraging each other, stories and songs and sometimes food, and maybe good food. So there was once a Farbrengen. It was going really, really well into the night, and they ran out of food. The host is known as the Rashbatz, Hasidic rabbi, Rashbatz. So it was at his house, and there was no more food. So they said, is there any more food? He said, no. And then he said, you know what? We have a goat. There's a goat. They owned a goat. There happened to be amongst the assembled, there was a shochet. You know what a shochet is? A ritual slaughterer. Oh, that was it. You have a goat. You have someone to prepare the meat. Chick-chock. The next thing you know, there's a grill going on. Mark is making faces. Would you rather have it 3 weeks later? What are you talking about? They prepared it that night. They had a Farbrengen, fresh meat. Listen, if you're a vegetarian, that's fine. I get it. It's fine. No, you don't have to eat meat. There's no mitzvah to eat meat. It's fine. I'm telling you a story that happened. There were meat eaters in the assembled at the Farbrengen. They ran out of food. They wanted to eat meat. There was a goat. They prepared the goat. Now, the Rashbatz's wife was sleeping. She slept through the Farbrengen. The next morning, she gets up. The Farbrengen went all night. And in the morning, everyone was praying. And maybe they were praying in the house. Maybe not. Maybe he was praying in the house, in his own house. His wife says to him, where's the goat? What happened to the goat? She didn't know what happened. She said, where's the goat? So he says, last night the goat was saying, Ba. Today it's saying, Hashem Echad. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Right? Yesterday the goat was making goat sounds. Today the goat is praying. That's what I mean by elevating the food. Right? We take such a, where else would that story be? I mean, that's such a Hasidic story. I mean, that's if you want to know a Hasidic story, that's a Hasidic story right there. Boom. A Farbrengen, a goat, a shochet, a good meal, a wife who says, where's the goat? And the husband says, now it's praying. And that's it. The goat was praying in the morning. That's what we do when we eat. We take the energy of the food, we internalize it, and then we uplift it. That's a very mindful process, because any false move, and it can become all about satisfying my urge to eat, a carnal urge to eat. And then it's not an elevatory experience, it's a degrading experience. You're running after a goat. If you're going to elevate it, if you're going to fulfill the purpose of creation, that's one thing, permission. You're just now going to run after a steak? You're going to drive 10 miles for a piece of sushi? Where's the shame? That's it? Just because you're hungry? Come on. You're better than that. I'm not speaking to you. I'm speaking to myself, by the way. This is an internal dialogue that our higher self, our soul, has with our lower self, our body, every time we sit down to a meal. You might not be aware of it, but this is what's going on. The higher self says, can we have a higher purpose here? And the lower self says, what higher purpose? I'm up starving. And the higher self says, really? You're going to forget about this meal in 5 minutes, right? It's not going to last too long. There's a higher purpose here. Let's make it happen. So washing the hands, let's get all the way back to hand washing. Why do we wash hands? We wash hands because that creates the pause. That creates the moment for us to stop and reflect and think about why it is that we're eating. And we pour water over our hands. You know why? Water is symbolic of, unmute yourself if you know this one, our sages liken water equals what? Help me out. Water is symbolic of?
Guilt.
Well, we said about water before with guilt, but spiritually, what is water symbolic of? David, you have something?
Life.
Life, okay, good. It's also symbolic of Torah. Water is symbolic of Torah. And the message here is, before we eat, we want to be infused. We want to re-infuse ourselves, re-gird ourselves. In other words, strengthen ourselves with inspiration, Jewish inspiration, Torah inspiration, so that our eating will be healthy, mindful, not only physically, but spiritually. There's an incredible idea shared by the Hasidic Rabbi Reb Tzadok of Lublin, who says he reimagines the openings, well, not the opening story, but the story of Adam and Eve. And he says, we usually think there were two different trees. There was a tree of life and the tree of knowledge. And God said, you can eat the tree of life, but don't eat the tree of knowledge. Reb Tzadok of Lublin says, you know what? There was just one tree. There was only one tree. But we have two names for it. Exactly. God was saying, either your eating is going to be from the tree of life, a higher experience, or it's going to only be about the tree of knowledge. It's just about getting to know the food, just absorbing and consuming the food. That's a choice that we make. God said, eat from this tree, don't eat from that tree. It was the same fruit. Again, this is not the normal way we understand the story. This is a Hasidic way or a mystic way of understanding the story. I get it, but there's a powerful message here. Every time we eat, we are faced with the same choice of Adam and Eve, and faced with the same commandment that God gave to the first human beings. Eat from the tree of life. Eat in a way that's uplifting, that connects you with the source of life, its source of life, your source of life. It's all about life. Don't just eat from a place of knowledge, i.e., physical, biological consumption. Don't just eat from a place of self-awareness. I'm hungry, I need to eat. Make it a higher experience. Eating from the tree of life is kosher. Eating from the tree of knowledge, not so kosher. Make sense? I love that interpretation. It's a timeless commandment. Every time we sit down to a meal, we have the choice. The power is in our hands. Will this be a tree of life, or will this be a tree of knowledge? So again, all of this is to explain, again, getting back to the idea, getting back to the point here, all of this is to explain the hand washing before bread. Now, why do we do this specifically before bread? The idea is, in Judaism, we understand that bread is a staple food. Other foods may not be as satisfying as bread. Bread is the most satisfying of the food categories. Today there are many diets that where one is to avoid carbs. So, if that's the case, then you're not going to do the hand washing, and maybe you're not so satisfied. I don't know. Who knows? I guess it's called a diet for a reason, right? But when we eat bread, it's like a staple of our meal, and that's when these ideas, this ritual kicks in. Now, what else did I want to share about that? I think that's pretty much it. Again, that last point that I mentioned about the tree, to me, it resonates so deeply. It's a question about life itself. Is this moment solely focused on pleasure, or is it connected with purpose? Pleasure or purpose? That's the choice. Constantly in life. Are we going to succumb to just simple pleasure, which is kind of animalistic? Like, you don't need to be a human being to get pleasure from food. Animals also enjoy their food, right? A human being should have a higher level of experience, right? So is it all only about pleasure, or is there also this purpose-driven experience here as well? And the idea is that it should be the latter. So as we'll see, as we go through the rest of the points in tonight's class, you'll see how there are many details when it comes to the Jewish how of eating that speak to this end goal of making it about the purpose and not just about the pleasure. Many opportunities for us to stop and think, because without stopping, we're not going to think. Life moves too fast. It's too easy to grab something and go, and it'll be mindless consumption. Yeah, maybe another upside is even on a physical level, when we become more aware of what we're eating through washing our hands, etc. We stop and think, do I really need to eat this, right? Am I really hungry? We'll see soon how Maimonides gives us many different tips for eating. And one of them is, I'll share the others later, one of them is only eat when you really need to eat. No bored eating, right? What am I doing? I don't know what I'm doing. All right, let me go to the fridge. That's mindless eating. That's mindless eating, and that is not that's not the Jewish way. So we have this stop, this pause before eating bread. We wash our hands. It reminds us, or it's about the ritual for the hand washing for the Kohen that we've all adopted, even without a temple, and it symbolizes our desire and our intent to eat with purpose and not just for pleasure. Okay, any questions? Let me read, there's some questions here in the comments. Let me read them now. By the way, at any point in time, unmute yourself, ask for clarification, add something. Really, it's meant to be an open forum, or chat, or you can send me text. Let me read a few of these that came in while I was talking. Okay, one is about an upcoming event. One is about the Mark is asking the question. Mark, as I said, is a Levi, is a Levite. He's at, and a Levite in synagogues will wash the hands of the Kohen before the priestly blessing that happens on the holidays. On the major Jewish holidays, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Passover, Shavuot. On the major holidays, the biblical holidays, the priests, even today, bless the congregation toward the end of the Musaf prayer, the afternoon prayer, the additional morning prayer. Before they get up in front of the synagogue to bless the congregation with the priestly blessing, their hands are washed by the Levites. So Mark is asking about the method to wash, alternating or 3 and 3. The answer is 3 and 3. Why? Because the priests, before they would eat the truma food, the truma bread, as I mentioned before, they would wash their hands. How would they wash their hands? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, not alternating. The only time we alternate is in the morning. And we said that specific reason for the alternating in the morning is because of the spiritual impurity that was incurred through sleep. So the Kohanim wash their hands to become extra purified before the blessing or before eating the food, the truma, but that's an extra measure of purification. That's like becoming super holy. The one that we do in the morning when we wake up, that's to get rid of legitimate semi-deathly impurity. And when we do that, the first time we pour, the impurity jumps to the other hand, away from the water. So we want to quickly neutralize it on both hands and alternate back and forth. That's what we alternate, but we only alternate in the morning. For the other hand washings, we go 3 and 3. In fact, when it comes to the washing before the vegetable, the karpas at the Seder, right? We're coming from Passover a month ago, right? Not so, yeah, all right. It's a little bit in the rearview mirror. But at the Passover, we famously dip a vegetable in salt water toward the beginning of the Seder, and we wash our hands before that. And we wash our hands also 3 and 3. We don't alternate. Alternating is only done in the morning when we wake up, and that's because there's a deep impurity on the fingernails that's jumping from one hand to the other. So that's what we alternate. Any other washing is 3 and 3. Okay. Oh, Alex is asking, why dip the bread in salt? Excellent question. Toward the end of the class, I will talk about the significance of salt on our tables and why we do that. By the way, you can follow along. I sent you, did you get that email with the attachment? Did that come through? Okay, I forgot to check in. So, I mentioned it, I referenced it, but I didn't actually ask you to confirm that. So I'm glad you can open it, you can keep it open, you can reference back and forth. That's pretty much the outline of what we're going through. I have my own outline, but that'll give you I may not be going in the exact same order as that, but that's kind of like the greatest hits of our discussion. Now let's get back to the eating. So what we did was we washed the hands, right? Well, we fed the animals, we washed the hands, and now we say the blessing. I mentioned before, we say the blessing for the hand washing. If we're doing that, if we're eating bread, we say the hamotzi blessing. But if we eat anything, right? If you're drinking coffee, you don't wash your hands, but there's a blessing. If you're eating cheesecake, I just mentioned cheesecake because Shavuot is coming, and it's the holiday, the cheesecake. So you then also say a blessing before eating that. If you're eating, cereal, there's a blessing before. There are blessings related before all the things that we eat. The question is why? Why the blessings? I'm going to give you 3 insights. Number 1, the blessing. First of all, we don't bless the food. You know what? Let me take a half step back. I'm realizing that maybe I should clarify this. People think that we bless the food, not blessing food. Honestly, I don't even know what that means to bless food. What are you telling the food to be to grow old and prosper? What's the blessing for the food? You're not blessing food. Good luck in all your endeavors, and then you consume it. I'm not sure what the blessing, what does that even mean to bless the food? We don't bless the food. We acknowledge God. That's very different than blessing food. We say a blessing to God. We thank God, essentially, for the food that we're about to eat. So there's a few pieces to this. So the blessing asks, number 1, it asks permission from God to consume this item. We assume the answer is yes, but we don't wait for the answer because we don't necessarily hear the answer from God, but we at least go through the process of saying a blessing to God, speaking to God, and in such a way, the rabbis say, we ask permission from God to consume this item. Number two, the second point of the blessing before eating is we thank God, like I mentioned a moment ago, we thank God for the food. So one is asking permission, and one is simply a statement of gratitude. Thank you for blessing the land and allowing this food to grow, and I'm grateful for it. Thank you. The third point is stopping and pausing and blessing is again about the pause. It's about the space. It's about the ability to be mindful. If there is no blessing and you just put something in your mouth without thinking, what are the odds that you're going to feel that gratitude? So it's about the pause. Some say it's less about the blessing, but more about the pause. Either way, we say the blessing. Now, there are 6 blessings. I want you to reference. Now, I do want you to look, if you have it, I want you to look at you know what? Maybe I'll do this. I'm going to share my screen just in case you don't have it or you don't have it open. I'm going to share my screen. And that way we can reference it together. I don't see it here. Why don't I see it? I'm looking to share my screen and it's not giving me the option. What are you going to do? What are you going to do when Zoom does not give you the option? It's not coming up.
I can share mine. If you enable me, I can share mine.
Oh, even better. Okay, how do I enable you? Let me get participants. Jerry, let me make you co-host. Boom. Congratulations, you've been upgraded to first class. Now, if you will be so kind, awesome. Look at you, thank you so much. Let's start from the top. Okay, all the food blessings begin the same. They all begin with that phrase, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. I'm not saying God's name, by the way. You would pronounce it differently if you were actually doing it, but I'm not actually doing it, so I don't want to just say God's name in vain. So you would say Baruch atah, God's name, Hashem Elokeinu, melech haolam, blessed are you, Lord, our God, King of the universe. And then you finish it off by reciting the specific type of food item that you're eating. So when it comes to eating fruit of the tree, fruits that grow on trees, you say Borei Pri Ha'etz, which means, blessed are you, God. See, we don't bless the food, we bless God. Blessed are you, God, who creates the fruit of the tree. And then if you're eating a vegetable or the fruit of a plant, in other words, the difference between a tree and a vegetable is, where does it grow from? Is it growing from branches from a tree, or is it growing directly connected to the ground, or pretty much directly connected to the ground? So in the latter case, where it's connected pretty much to the ground, then you say a different blessing, Borei Pri Ha'adama, which means who creates the fruit of the earth. So there's fruit of the tree if it's growing from a tree. If it's coming from the earth, that refers to standard earth vegetables, potatoes, right? Carrots. And we'll see soon there's some interesting, food items that could go either way, and we'll explore some of those for a fun discussion in a moment. But that you say the Hadama, the fruit of the earth blessing. When it comes to baked items, or items not even baked, food items made from 5 types of grain: wheat, barley, oat, spelt, or rye flour, you say the Borei Minei Mazonos, which means who creates, bless your God, who creates various kinds of food. They don't grow from it's not directly from the earth, it's processed at this point. If it's made, wheat, barley, oat, it's not eating pure wheat, it's eating flour made into something, cake or whatever it is, crackers. At that point, it's been processed on some level, so you say this blessing. Now, if it's bread or matzah, you say the famous Hamotzi Lechem Min Haaretz, which I referenced before, who brings forth bread from the earth. That one would also be preceded, as you know now, by a washing of the hands, 3 on each side. And then we have the next one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, number 5 is the blessing over wine or grape juice. Famously, it's Borei Pri Hagafen, who creates the fruit of the vine. Oh, I forgot to read the translation of Hamotz Lech Aretz. That means who brings forth bread from the earth. It's the bread. The wine or grape juice is who creates the fruit of the vine. And the last one is, this is the catch-all for everything else. Dairy, meat, beverages. You say shahakol nihiyah b'dvaro, by whose word all things came to be. You bless God, who basically creates everything, including this food that I'm about to eat, if it doesn't fall into those other categories. Now, these are the blessings that are recited for all the various foods. What we should do, like I mentioned before with the bread, with all these items, before you say the blessing, make sure the food is ready. Make sure that it's ready to go, that it's in your hand even. Say the blessing and immediately consume it. Why? We don't want to create an interruption between the intention, which is the blessing, and the action, which is the eating. Remember, Judaism always wishes to guide us into a state of mindfulness, into a state of being present, of being aware, of having a higher consciousness while doing this action. The blessing is a big piece of that. Eating can be a very physical action, materialistic action. The blessing guides us into a place of higher mindfulness. We're speaking about God, we're speaking about creation, we're speaking about blessings, and then we move immediately into the consumption so that the consumption is infused with that higher purpose. Okay, Jerry, I think we're good. If you don't mind, if you can unshare the share, thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. You helped us out. You helped me out. I really appreciate that. Okay, so now let us continue this discussion. What about strawberries? If we're talking about, food items and their blessings, well, what are strawberries? Do they grow from the earth or do they grow from trees? Well, strawberries, as you may know, don't actually grow from trees, right? Unmute yourself if you know how strawberries grow. Who knows about strawberries?
On a vine.
Yeah, they grow from.
They grow from what?
Strawberries grow from a vine.
From a vine. Why not? So Jewish law says that when it comes to strawberries, the definition of a tree for the tree blessing, for the fruit of the tree blessing, the definition of a tree is something that withstands the seasons and continuously produces the fruit. As some of you may know, we have a peach tree in our front yard, and that peach tree is around all year, not producing peaches all year, but it's around all year, and every year, annually, it produces peaches once again. That's a classic example of the fruit of the tree, the fruit of the blessing of the fruit of the tree. When it comes to the strawberry, I have some crack research on this. When it comes to the strawberry plant is a herbaceous perennial. You like that? Is it herbaceous or herbaceous? Who knows? I'm going to go with herbaceous perennial, which means that the plant dies in the winter and grows new foliage every spring. So it's like a new plant each year. So it's coming again from the earth. It's not a tree the tree is renewing the fruit. It's the earth is renewing the fruit. Therefore, you go ha'adama. It's not a fruit. It's not defined in blessing categorization as a fruit. It's defined as more of a vegetable in the sense that something that grows from the ground. What about raspberries? I'm glad you asked. Raspberries is a big discussion amongst the rabbis. There's opinions on both sides based on how raspberries grow and how their cones grow and how it's complicated. The consensus of most is that also you say ha'adama, it comes from the earth, even though it's growing from these cones, these whatever you call them, but nonetheless, it's ha'adama because of the way that it grows and the way that it lasts or doesn't last throughout the season. So again, there are many food items that are clear. It's obviously this or that. Drinking a cup of milk, shahakal, right? Eating a grape, right? Is ha'etz. If it's grape juice, it's borei pri hagafen. there are certain things that are clear. But if you are eating some things that could go either way, then it becomes a little bit tricky. So you could either look it up online. There are websites that will give you, lists of foods and their blessings, or you can even download apps. There are many free apps that are on the various app stores, platforms, iOS, Android, whatever you have, whatever you want. That will tell you, you just type in the food and it'll tell you.
Rabbi,
Yes.
what about a banana? Isn't it ha'adamah?
Bananas are, yes. Bananas, I believe, are Adama, correct.
They're
Are
not-
they?
Aren't they
I
on
don't
a
eat
tree?
banana. I don't usually bananas.
I think they're
Yes.
from a tree.
No, it's a ha'adamah for sure.
Okay.
I have some banana trees.
Is because part of that is because a banana tree is essentially chopped down to yield the banana. So
It's the way the banana grows.
No.
it's not like the tree is there and they pick it off and they chop it down.
Here we go.
The
Here
way
we go.
it grows.
Here we go.
I have 2 banana trees and they grow on the tree and you just pluck them right off.
Yeah.
Oh, that's what I was
They grow upside down and grow upwards.
Okay, here, check
Upside
this
down.
out. Check this out. I'm reading now from Chabad.org. See, it's good to have the internet. On the one hand, the banana plant is a perennial. On the other hand, almost the entire structure that is above ground dies and regrows each year. If the definition of a tree is a plant whose central stem stays from year to year, the proper blessing on a banana would be Borei Pri Ha'adama. And this is the established halacha. However, according to the opinion of Rabbeinu Asher, the proper blessing on a banana would actually be Borei Pri Ha'etz. In other words, it's the subject of a dispute. So
So
There's
there
a
weren't that
difference of
many.
opinion.
There weren't that many bananas in Belarus, I guess.
No.
Banana trees. Yeah.
no, there weren't, but that's why it's, I'll tell you a funny story. My grandfather tells me this. His father, when he came from the old country, I think they moved to the Lower East Side. And first time, they didn't have a banana in the old country. First time he had a banana, his father bit into the whole thing without peeling it. He didn't know. He was so traumatized by how it tasted and how the whole experience was, he refused to eat bananas the rest of his life. He would not touch. They told him, peel the banana. He's like, I'm done. Tried it once. No, not for me. Anyway, you're right. There were many countries in which bananas just simply were not a thing. So Adina Malka is asking about transliterations of the blessings. Best would be to download an app or visit a website. I'm sure Chabad.org has it. Transliteration of the blessings. Just Google it. You will find it. Make sure it's a legitimate source, obviously. And if you want, you can double check it with me. Maybe even I can quickly look for this. Blessings for foods and see if we have a transliteration for it. Look, we can pull this up. I don't want to stall the class though while I'm looking for it. Okay, let's continue. Let's move on.
Rabbi, can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah, for sure.
Is there a rule of thumb as to, I get the fruit part, if it's a rule of thumb of byproducts? So apple juice, is that Pri Ha'etz? Or coffee, is a fruit, I think it's a fruit, the bean itself. Is there a general rule about things that are made from other things?
Yes. Generally speaking, it depends. There's no hard and fast rule. When it comes to fruit juice, you would say shahakol. It's the catch-all. You don't say it's not the fruit, it's now processed into something else. It's a different form. That's one example. So it really depends on what we're talking about, but that's kind of that answers. What was your other question? What was your other example that you gave? I'm sorry, I forgot.
Coffee. It's probably
Coffee is also shahakol because it's processed. And it takes on almost, assumes a new form almost. I am posting now in the chat on this on the Zoom. You'll see in the chat, I sent it to everybody. You should open up the chat, you'll see it. It's a link to Chabad.org that has the blessings over food with a little bit of insight and the blessings in Hebrew, in English, and transliteration. So you'll find it, and there's even an audio file for you to play and to hear how it's being said. So if you want to hear how to say it, there's even an audio file. I don't know who's saying it, so I can't vouch for the, I haven't heard it. I haven't vetted this first, but if it's not Chabad.org, it's got to be legit. Okay, let us continue with a discussion about these blessings. Okay, no, I think, two more quick points about the blessings. If it's a bread meal and you wash your hands and said the hamotzi, here's the magic sauce. You don't need to say other blessings. If you say, I'll say it one more time. If it's a meal that has bread, and at the beginning of the meal you wash your hands, you ate bread, you said the hamotzi, and you ate the bread, then you are exempt from any other blessings. The bread is the catch-all blessing. I'm using catch-all in a different context that I used it before. I know, and my apologies for the confusion if it's confusing, but it is the blessing that contains them all, if you will. So once you've done the bread, you're good to go, except for dessert, because dessert is considered to be a separate part of the meal, or a separate meal even. So if you have now cake or ice cream or food for dessert, then you say the blessing for the dessert with that specific item, mezonot, shehakol, or ha'etz, depending on whatever you're eating. But throughout the meal, all you say is the hamotzi. So for example, Friday night, we say the hagafen on the wine, the kiddush, we say the hagafen. We say the hamotzi, you're good to go. That's it, no more blessings. Now, if you're eating a meal without bread, then you go each one. But here's the other trick. If you're eating multiple fruits, or multiple fruit, you only say one blessing, and that covers that entire category. So if you're eating 7-layer cake, and kichel, and you're eating a cookie, a black and white cookie, and you're eating different types of cakes and cookies, there's only one mezonos blessing, and then you're good to go. So each category is covers itself. The hamotzi covers other categories, with the exception of, as I mentioned, with the exception of desserts and wine. If you would eat wine in the middle of that meal, if it wasn't a Friday night, let's say you just sat down on a regular Tuesday night and you had a meal, you had bread, boom, you wash hamotzi. Then you pour yourself a glass of wine. You would say the blessing on the wine, because the wine is also considered to be a special type of food or drink, beverage. Okay, now let's jump into the last few points that I wanted to mention. Remember, today's class is not about what we eat, but kind of how we eat it. But in this context, I do want to mention one thing about meat and milk. Torah says not to mix meat and milk, fine. The rabbi said that let's include poultry, chicken, okay, fine. Fish is fine, but not poultry, chicken, not meat and milk, okay. But what if you ate one? When can you eat the other? Do you have to wait? What's the story? So many of you know this, but I just want to make sure that to present this. Practically speaking, after eating meat, Jewish law and custom tells us that we wait 6 hours before eating dairy. So if you had a very late night and you had a burger at 3 a.m., that's a very late night. You don't have milk in your coffee before 9 a.m., right? So after meat, we wait 6 hours. After dairy, Jewish law says all you need to do after dairy is rinse your mouth with some liquid, which means you can take a drink, and then eat something dry, if you will, like some food that kind of cleanses, like an abrasive, but like something that cleanses the mouth, so liquid and solid, and then you can eat meat right away. The custom, an accepted custom amongst many communities, is to wait 1 hour after eating dairy. It comes from the Zohar, it comes from Kabbalah, that you should wait 1 hour after dairy. So 6 hours, I'll go with this. This is the Chabad custom, 6 hours after meat, 1 hour after dairy, between one and the other. If it's hard and aged cheeses like Parmesan and Swiss, you also wait a full 6 hours after dairy before meat. Many reasons why, but we don't have time to explore all those, but that's just some basic ideas. Not just not mixing them together, but it's also there's some time that we wait between one and the other. Okay, so let's finish off with a few points about the sanctity of our dining rooms. The whole theme of pretty much the theme that's been running through tonight's class is the notion that eating is not just a physical experience, but it's a holy experience. And because of that, Our tradition tells us that our dining rooms are like the temple, the holy temple, and our tables, our dining room tables, or wherever maybe kitchen tables, whatever, table that we're eating on is like the Mizbeach, the altar, where the sacrifices were brought, where the offerings were elevated to God. That's our tables are like the altar in the temple, holy spaces, where the physical world melded with the spiritual reality, because that's what's going on. Because of the sanctity of our spaces, our dining spaces, and the sanctity of our tables, and the sanctity of our meals, we therefore we have several customs that we do at a meal. Number one, we invite guests. Now, I know that's a weird thing to say in the middle of lockdown or semi-lockdown, but usually outside of, pandemics, we invite guests. We seek to invite guests as much as possible, certainly for Shabbat meals, but even not. Why? Because it's a holy experience and guests bring additional blessings. That's what it says in the good book. So we invite guests. Number two, that's number one. Number two, we say words of Torah at the table. If it's meant to be a spiritual experience, it can't get any more spiritual when you recite words of Torah. If you don't say words of Torah, the risk is that even with the other rituals, it might become all about the food and not about the meaning behind it. So we make sure to say some divrei Torah, some words of Torah. I mentioned before, we wash our hands. We use a cup, a washing cup. The washing cup reminds us of the wash basin that the Kohen, that the priest used to use in the temple. So we use a washing cup. Again, it's a holy experience. And then, Alex, I know you asked this before, and I promised I would get back to it. We dip the bread. If we're eating bread, we dip the bread in salt. Why? Because when they brought offerings on the altar in the holy temple in Jerusalem back in the day, the Torah tells us it had to be accompanied with a lot of salt. That's what it says. The Torah says, bring salt with all your offerings. And so even today, there's no temple in Jerusalem. There's no sacrificial service because there's no temple in Jerusalem. There's no altar, but we have our tables and we have our bread. And that's what we have now. And that's how we elevate the world around us to God. And just like the temple and just like the altar, we have salt on our tables. Salt is a preservative. And that reminds us of how we have to preserve our traditions. Salt is also tasty and adds flavor, which reminds us that our Judaism has to be exciting, has to be flavorful. And then we dip the bread into salt 3 times. Again, we have sequences of 3 here. We specifically dip it into the salt and not sprinkle it over the bread because salt is representative of gevura, which is severity. Bread is kindness, chesed. We want the kindness to overwhelm the severity and not the other way around. We don't want the severity sprinkled on top of our kindness. We want the kindness to mitigate or neutralize the severity. We want the blessings and not the strictness. I mentioned before, I'm just finishing up a few points. Give me another minute and a half, 2 minutes. Maimonides, as I said before, teaches us some health tips with regards to eating. Number 1, I'll mention a few. Don't talk with your mouth full. It wasn't just your mother that said this. It was Maimonides, the great physician, philosopher, and Jewish legal expert. It's not healthy to talk with our mouths full. Number 2, eat slowly. That allows us to live longer. That's what he said. Maimonides says, don't eat. I mentioned this before. Don't eat unless we're actually hungry, not if we're bored. Number 4 is don't overeat, which means he says, Rambam says, Maimonides says, only eat until you're 3/4 full. Don't eat so that you're all the way full. Eat, but stop before you get full. And number 5, be careful with the unhealthy foods. If it's not healthy physically, don't eat it. Even if it's kosher, don't eat it. It's not good. Don't put unhealthy things in our body, toxic things. It's not healthy. I'll anecdotally mention, I'm just overwhelmed with thinking about my grandfather, who is to me, has always been a role model in eating. And may he live many, many continued long years and with good health. Kenai Nahari, he's 97, and may he live and be strong and be well. But I'll tell you a lesson that I learned from him eating, no matter what meal it is, it could be the most lavish, delicious, expensive meal. He'll eat a little bit of a variety of things. He'll never like just jump in, I'll go all in. Always a little bit and not overeating. He's an example to me, just a personal role model for someone who lives these ideas of Maimonides of eating healthy, eating a good variety of foods, which I didn't mention, but he also mentions, and not eating to the point where, I'm stuffed, I can't eat anymore. That means we've gone too far. That was already too far. We're supposed to eat 3/4. Anyway, that's anecdotally. Okay, so let's conclude today's class by mentioning again some more things with regards to how we respect food. We don't step on bread. We don't step on food. We don't throw food. We don't pass a cup that's full of water, a cup that's full around the table because it might spill on the food and ruin it. We don't use food as props. Like we don't put fruit as like a place to hold decorations, like in a centerpiece. We treat food with respect, recognizing that food is a blessing. We also, I need to mention baltashas. We don't waste food. We don't prepare more food than we need, and we try to avoid throwing out food. Not from a sense of guilt, like they used to say, eat your food because there are people starving somewhere else. It's not about guilt. It's about respecting the world and not being wasteful. It's a Jewish value in not being wasteful. And sharing as well. One thing that we don't have time to mention tonight is the blessing after a meal. The Torah says there's a biblical commandment to say a grace after meals, a blessing after meal. We have 4 primary blessings. The first was composed by Moses, which thanks God for the food. The second was composed by Joshua. That thanks God for the land of Israel. The third was composed by King David and King Solomon, thanking God for Jerusalem, capital city. And the fourth was composed by the sages of later times, which is basically a request that God continue to provide for our needs, protect us, and bring us ultimately back to the land with the coming of Mashiach and the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem, etc. One final point, and this is it. Before we say the blessing after a meal, before we recite this grace after meals, if you will, which you can find it online, again, Chabad.org, or go to any wedding or bar mitzvah. They usually give you those. I thought I brought one in. Little booklets with the blessing, a few pages. But here's the thing: before we do that, there's a Jewish custom, to take the knives off the table. Has anybody heard of this? You take the knife off the table, remove the knife. Why? Gets back to the temple and the altar. The Torah says when you build the altar for the temple, don't use metal tools to cut the stones, because metal is a violent element. Metal is used for warfare. Metal is used to kill, to take life. And the altar in the temple, which is a place to connect with God, is a place of life, not a place of death. It's a place of giving, not a place of taking. It's a place of peace and not a place of war. Our homes ought to be the same way. Places, sanctuaries of peace, love, health, life, and not the opposite. So throughout the meal, you need a knife to cut your food, to cut the bread, to cut the meat, to cut the whatever it is. Okay. But as a sign of what our tables really are and what our homes really are, before we finish the meal, before we thank God for the food that we ate, after we ate, we take off the knives as a final declaration that in this space, we sanctify, we glorify, we honor life and peace and love. Thank you for joining me tonight for our second lesson of Judaism at Home. Next week, we look at what it means to talk to God in your house. How do we talk to God at home? That is next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. I am formally concluding the class. We're a few minutes past the time. Thank you for sticking with me. I appreciate that. If you want to ask any questions, I'm still around for the next several minutes until we answer all the questions. So feel free to ask. But again, thank you for your time. Thank you for joining with me on this journey of Judaism at home. Thank you very much.
Thank
you.
you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
I'm looking at the
Thank you.
chat.
Thank
My
you.
pleasure, my pleasure. I'm looking at the chat. I'm seeing, why do most, wow. Mark is asking the $1 million question. It says, why do a lot of people say the blessings before the food, but forget to say the blessing after the food? And Mark is asking, it's strange because the one after we eat is the biblical commandment. The ones before we eat are rabbinic in origin. The rabbi said, say those blessings before we eat. The Torah says, the Bible says, do the ones after. Mark, the question is the answer. Because before you eat, you're hungry. And you're like, God, I need to eat. You're already blessing God. After you ate, who remembers about God? You're already good. Who needs God? You're fine now. That's when God says, don't forget where it came from. That's when Torah says, remember, it's like the guy who needs the parking spot for the meeting. Okay, the famous story, the guy who's late for the meeting and he's circling the parking lot and he's like, oh my God, my meeting's in 5 minutes, in 4 minutes, in 3 minutes to do it. I'm gonna be late, I'm gonna lose the deal. God, please give me a parking spot. If you give me a parking spot, I'll come to synagogue. If you give me a parking spot, I'll wrap tefillin. If you give me a parking spot, I'll observe Shabbat. He's making all these promises. Finally, the 10th time around, a guy pulls out, a space opens up and he pulls in. He says, you know what, God, deal's off, I got a spot, we're good. When we're in need, there are no atheists in a foxhole. When you're in need, then you'll bless God from today to tomorrow. You'll sing God's praises. But when everything's fine, who needs God? I'm not saying this. I'm saying it's harder to connect with God when we're in a state of good health and wealth. We could forget. We take it for granted. When we're in a place of need, listen, let's just be very honest here. People turn to God, religion, Torah, rabbis, when things get a little bit difficult. Now, shouldn't it always be like that? Of course. But this is human nature. When things are going well, we kind of forget, everything's going well. Let's not rock the boat, right? Everything's good. Yeah, it's fine. So after we eat, that's exactly when the Torah says, please don't forget. By the way, before Moses passed away, he spoke to the people for 37 days before his passing. The Torah records it. It's the book of Deuteronomy. The entire book of Deuteronomy is Moses' final will and testament. The whole book. Moses says the same thing again and again and again. Moses says, please don't forget. You're going to go into Israel. Now you're living a difficult life. You're reliant on God every day. Manna from heaven, battles and living in the desert. You need God. But you're going to come into Israel and it's going to be beautiful. You're going to have your land. You're going to have your trees and your food, and it's going to be gewaldig. It's going to be amazing. And you might forget about God. Moses says, please, I beg you, don't forget about God. Don't forget where the blessings are coming from. Remember to thank God after you eat. Before you eat, it's almost intuitive. After you eat, easy to forget. It's easier to ask than to say thank you afterwards. That's the human nature, which is why it's a biblical mitzvah. But you're right, Mark, your point that many people say the blessings before and then forget afterwards, that's the point. That's the exact point. Because it's so easy to forget, that's why it's a mitzvah, so that we don't forget. Adina Malka is asking, because I said this very quickly, to very quickly repeat the 4 authors of the grace after meals and what they were for. Okay, Moses authored the first blessing, which is for the food itself, thanking God for creating the food. Second blessing was Joshua, who led the Jewish people into Egypt. That's weird. Into Israel. Faux pas. Into Israel. That's thanking God for the land of Israel. The third blessing is thanking God for the capital city, Jerusalem, where the temple was built by King David and King Solomon, who authored that blessing. The fourth was authored years later by the sages in the time of exile, after the temple was destroyed, asking God to still protect us and still bless us and still provide for us and ultimately bring us back to the land and bring us back to Mashiach and the temple and all that good stuff. So that's the fourth blessing. So the first three are kind of a little bit more ancient in origin. By the way, that's why for those that know it a little bit by heart or pieces of it, there's a line in the blessing after meal, Uvenei Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh B'mher V'Yameinu, Baruch Atah Hashem, Bonei V'Rachamav Yerushalayim, Amen. That's the blessing, right? We say, Uvenei Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh B'mher V'Yameinu, Baruch Atah Hashem, Bonei V'Rachamav Yerushalayim, Amen. We say Amen to our own blessing. We never do that. We never do. Other people say Amen to our blessing. The way Amen works in Jewish prayer is one person says the blessing and the other one says Amen. Amen means I agree with that. Amen means right on, brother. That's what it means, right? So why are we saying Amen in the blessing after meal? This is after the third blessing, by the way. This is the end of the third blessing. We say Amen to our own blessing. Very strange. Never do that. This is the one time. The reason is to delineate, to demarcate, to create a distinction between the first three blessings, which are more ancient in origin, and the fourth blessing, which is, I'm not saying it's modern like 100 years ago. It's still going back 1,000+ years, almost 2,000 years, but it's post-exile, post-exilic Jewish life. So to create, some say this is why the liturgy follows that model. So in order to delineate, to demarcate, to distinguish between the opening three and the last, at the end of that third blessing, we add in the word Amen to kind of like create some sort of division. That's what's brought down in some books. Anyway, any other questions? I think that's it. Okay, good. Great seeing you all. Stay healthy, stay well. And by the way, I will say this, look out for some exciting announcements. There's been a lot of exciting announcements over the last week or two, but there's one that's going to hit soon that is pretty incredible. So look out for an announcement coming soon. Keep your ear to the ground, right? Get those cans with those strings. I don't even know what that means. Okay, we'll see you all. Blessings to everyone. Stay well, stay healthy, and eat as gesundheit. Eat well. See you all.
Yashkoach, thank you.
All right.
Thank
Pleasure.
you.
Thank you, Rabbi.